and welcome to our Interspiritual Luminaries conversation. We have a very special guest with us today. And if you're listening to the recording, today is June 29th, 2023. My name is Jeanette Banishak, and I am a co-founder and co-director of the Spiritual Guidance Training Institute. And I have two other colleagues with me as well.
I am Gian Lundy. Hello, everybody.
J. Beulah Howard. Hello.
And I am going to introduce Brenda Salgado and give a little bit of an introduction and then start with our first question. But welcome, Brenda. So happy to have you here. So Brenda Salgado is a founder of Nepantla Consulting and program director of the Racial Healing Initiative. She's a spiritual and mindfulness author, speaker, wisdom keeper, healer, trainer, and organizational consultant. She has over 25 years of experience in transformative leadership development, nonprofit management, traditional healing and ceremony, mindful leadership training, movement building, women's health, and social justice. Brenda is in the process of establishing the Nepantla Land Trust and the Nepantla Center for Healing and Renewal. Brenda has received training from elders in traditional medicine and healing ceremony in Purepecha, Xochimilco, Toltec, and other indigenous lineages. Brenda draws on the healing powers of the natural world to guide her work. Her current projects are focused on transformational leadership, sacred economics, reconnecting others to deeper relationship with the land, mindfulness practices that draw from multiple traditions, ceremony for ancestral healing and collective transformation, and the weaving of mindfulness and indigenous teachings and prophecy for understanding the times we are in as a human family. She's committed to co-creating a society filled with wholeness and beauty. She has a book, Real World Mindfulness, and a website, nepantlaconsulting.com. I'm wondering, Brenda, if you can begin maybe by defining Nepantla, because I've mentioned it a couple of different times, and it's what your consulting organization is named after. Welcome. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Had muted it when my furry nephew came in to say hi.
Furry nephews are definitely welcome.
He's a big labradoodle. It's a sweetheart. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for that warm introduction. And mostly I just want to say what I'm grateful for our relationship and that we met in kind of dialogue and spiritual dialogue and friendship. So it's an honor to be here with you and to make new friends today as well. So Nepantla is an indigenous Nahuatl word from Mesoamerica. When I first read about it, I got really emotional when I first saw the word because Gloria Anzaldúa wrote a lot about Nepantla and what this word means. And she has a book called This Bridge Called My Back. And there's so much I could see of myself in that and what I came here to do in this time. So Nepantla, she talks a lot about kind of folks who live in between spaces and in between identities and worlds, and that they often serve as kind of points of psychic transformation and transformation in their communities because they can see things from different perspectives in ways that sometimes others might have a hard time seeing. And it's also this place that's about kind of our personal transformation too, when we're in between places. So there's a woman I really love, Anna Louise Keating, who's known as the preeminent kind of Gloria Anzaldúa scholar. She writes a lot about her writings and Nepantla being about liminal space where transformation can occur. That they're spaces of great confusion and anxiety and loss of control, but also that it's this place for huge transformation where we shatter our worldviews, where we shatter our identities, and it's painful and messy and confusing, but it's like the caterpillar turning in the butterfly and just being mushed up and needing to go. But in particular, she would talk about nepantleras, people who serve in that role of being in between and who facilitate passages between the worlds. And they're threshold people. They often can see different perspectives and between the cracks. And so that helps them to reconceive the world in ways that include everyone. So they have more global consciousness. It's can be difficult because if you can see things from between the cracks and multiple perspectives, and you're not in the us versus them kind of paradigm, sometimes people might think that you're not loyal and you don't belong anywhere. It can be a lonely place, but it's also a place of being a supreme border crosser and an intermediary between cultures and various versions of reality. So you can help awaken bigger consciousness in the community. So it's both a gift to be a nepantlera and also can be challenging because because you travel between worlds.
Thank you for bringing that into this space. People who are a part of this conversation are emerging spiritual companions, our spiritual companions, our yoga instructors, our breathwork practitioners. They work in service with other people, and so I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the challenges and the gifts of being a nepantlera, and your identity related to being a nepantlera.
Yeah. I'll start by sharing something because I'm a very visual person.
So
for
something like this.
What's that?
Did you share this in the Thomas Keating Interspiritual Seminar?
I think I did. Yeah, I think I did. So for Indigenous folks, we always start by introducing ourselves by the people and the places we come from. So that 7 generations connection to the land, what holds you, what ancestors hold you, kind of thing. So my nepantlera journey starts with these 2 people in the middle. I'm the daughter of Carlos and Esmeralda Salgado, who are both born and raised in Nicaragua. And they're both still alive in their mid-80s. Daddy is getting up in age and has some Alzheimer's and dementia. So he spends a lot of time talking about Nicaragua these days, which is really beautiful, and his childhood. And Mom's a wonderful caregiver. And then in terms of ancestry, they're both of mixed Indigenous and Spanish descent. So there's a my body is nepantlera, carries the colonizer and the colonized in it. There's definitely more Indigenous on my mom's side than there is on my dad's side. And these 2 fell in love, and there was a lot of forces trying to keep them from being together. And creating this nepantlera child that carries both of those in her, those energies, those ancestors in her. They were married in San Francisco, California, and raised the 3 of us here. So I live in California. And then on the bottom left is my father's ancestors, his parents. Felipe I never met. Mariana I did grow up with in San Francisco. And then on the other side is my mother's parents, who had more Indigenous blood, but particularly my maternal grandmother, Maria, and then Arnoldo. Maria was a medicine person and a healer and healed within the family. But she wasn't safe to do that publicly. So I'm grateful that she's guiding me from the other side. She's a very strong ancestor guide from the other side. And then I give a lot of thanks for being raised in Daly City, the San Francisco area, that's Ohlone unceded lands, and talking to the oceans and to the trees and to the mountains from a very young age, but also really want to honor Volcan Masaya and the area surrounding Volcan Masaya, because my parents both grew up in small villages in Nicaragua that were surrounding this volcano. And so their ancestors have been in that area for many, many, many generations. And I know that that land holds me, even though I was raised there. It's been a joy to do ancestor ceremony and be in ceremony with Indigenous folks in Nicaragua, and to do some of the work of healing in that land too, ancestrally. So I wanted to share that because I think that's the beginning of my Nepantleta journey. Like I feel like there's so much around my father's ancestry that was more Spanish, and certainly that part of the lineage has a lot of trauma and disconnection, both in terms of how they relate to the land, how they treat each other as family, loss of connection to ancestors and ancestral ways. And so I as an adult, I can see just all the pain and suffering that not belonging caused in the family, and the suffering that was for my father and for my grandmother and for my uncles and so many people. And then on my mother's side, I'm really grateful for Maria, because she's someone who was still in the land of her ancestors. Even if she had experienced trauma with colonization, she had not lost her ways of connecting with the plants and the land and the medicine and of healing. And she both went to Catholic church on Sunday and also healed her children with indigenous medicine of the things the doctors said were incurable. And so she was able to braid those things and have that connection with spirit that I think so many of my father's ancestors lost. And so I have this understanding now from this Nepantleta way of seeing things, that there's a wealth that part of my family gave me that is about belonging to all that is, and a rootedness that is not about money, but is about deep connection with the non-human world, with the beloved unseen, and the capacity to co-create and be in relationship and to belong. So I feel like so much of my lessons have been around that. I know that my father's family didn't want my dad to marry my mom, and there was so much strife and pain and suffering there. And somehow my mother and father found a way through that and stayed together. They broke apart and actually came back together out of that desire to raise us together. And then the other thing I'll say, that I say this a lot as part of my journey, was I think because I was raised by these parents who are not born and raised here, they come from a culture that's very we oriented, very family oriented. We take care of each other. I didn't really understand that the US was me oriented until I hit the school system in grammar school. And I was like, wow, this is a really different story. And I had a lot of sadness for people here, for that level of kind of disconnection, isolation, or feeling like you have to do everything alone, because that was not the story I was handed as a child. And could see from a very young age, when they talk about fish swimming in, don't see the water that they're swimming in. I could see that my family came from a very we-oriented water, and that a lot of the US was very me-oriented water. And I had a lot of sadness around the conflict. Like, people don't know that so much of the conflict is about not knowing you're in a different story. And thinking that and I say all the time, if mom and dad had been raised and had been married and raised me in Nicaragua, I would think the whole world was we-oriented, and that's just the way things are. And if I was fifth or sixth generation here, I would think the whole world was me-oriented, because that indoctrination would have been thorough by then. And I would think the whole world was me-oriented, and that's just the way things are. But as a child, I could see that very clearly. And that's a gift that they gave me, to be able to see both the gifts of both cultures and ways of being, but also the challenges of both ways of being, and the disconnection that happens when people don't know they're in these different worldviews. So that, I think it's been a long journey that way. And also, to do the healing work of all my ancestors, whether I consider them colonized or colonized, they're all worthy of healing. And colonialism, racism, white supremacy has damaged everyone in the system. It's dehumanized everyone in the system, just different ways. And so it's been a really big gift to work with my healthier ancestors to turn towards my less healthy ancestors and do the healing work of all the lineages. So it's both in the human world and in the non-human world that I see that Nepantleta work is really important.
Thank you so much for sharing some of that. I'm thinking about the phrase you used at the beginning, a Nepantleta as someone, you as a Nepantleta, both colonizer and in person an Indigenous person, and having both of that. And I hear your story, and I honor your telling of it. Thanks for sharing it with us in this space, because I know you're continuing to tell that
Still
story.
doing it. Still doing the work too.
Yeah.
I know we had some questions you wanted to focus on.
Yeah. I didn't know if Jen or Tajay, did you want to ask? Do you want me to ask?
I'm happy to follow your lead, Jeanette, although I do have an initial question that might open us up to the other questions. And that's just basically is just how you carry, Brenda, how you carry your biography into your companionship with others.
Beautiful question. Thank you. I feel very grateful because a lot of my Indigenous teachers have really modeled kind of intergenerational, like leadership and passing of ceremony and wisdom and all those things. So I feel really grateful that I've had a lot of elders that have helped me when I've been learning, and have been very patient and compassionate, but also had a way of teaching me about honoring my own sovereignty and energy, and honoring their sovereignty and energy, and honoring other people's. There's ways they modeled being very wise, but also very humble at the same time. And to really be careful, I think, because of the Western model of like trying to fix things and fix people and fix problems, to start always by sharing story. Start always by talking about the people and the places you come from. Don't ever start from what do you do. It's a very Western thing to ask, what do you do? When you travel in other countries, they ask, who are your people? Where do you come from? They don't ask, what do you do for a living? So I think that's part of it. It's just being really curious about other people's story and journey, about who and where they come from and what their spiritual journey has been like. I like to share about my spiritual journey to start with, to make some safety for the other person to share about their spiritual journey. And when I'm really vulnerable and honest about the talking to the trees and the plants, and like being raised Catholic, went to Catholic school the whole way, and grammar school and high school, that was important to my mom. And as this child who was deeply spiritual, that actually was really good for me, in the sense that I didn't have to turn off my spiritual identity in that space, and I don't think I could have. But also just feeling this hunger for, like, so much of my spiritual walk is with ancestors and talking to trees and talking to the ocean, to the elemental beings. And there's not a lot of room for that here. And I remember saying to my mom in high school, as I got exposed to other traditions, I got really curious, just saying, like, this feels like a jacket that doesn't fit me. I'm glad it fits you. And I feel very connected to Jesus and Mary, and they talk to me all the time. But this piece around the ancestors, I said, I feel like my connection is clearer when I'm out in nature and talking to God and Jesus. And I said, and so that's curious for me. And I want to find the places where there's support for this part around the ancestors and nature, that's a little more explicit, and that led me to Buddhism and to Native American spirituality. And I see myself as someone who braids things now. Like, I've been exposed them as an adult to more of the contemplative and Gnostic parts of Catholicism. Like, oh, I wish I had this when I was a kid. I would have been so into that. But I see myself very much as an intermystic, and the dialogues that I met you at, Jeanette, I feel like are intermystic dialogues, rather than kind of focused on the intellectual and the theology dialogues. It's more dropping in together, right? So yeah, it's important to me when I'm first meeting someone, just to share from that place of who and where I come from, what my spiritual journey has been like, where that's Spirit has led me, in terms of different people, different traditions, different practices, and how that's unfolded and has required a lot of kind of intuition and listening to the guidance. And I think when I start from the place of sharing deeply that way, it makes it safe for other people to share with me as well. And a lot of times they'll say things like, I've never told anyone this before. Yeah, it's super important. To be a companion means being very curious and open about story.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brenda, as we were talking before some of the participants gathered, you were giving us an example of one of the things you were just involved with that clearly has so much to do with healing, healing our relationships, healing how we are with one another. And so this is a very big question, but it was on my heart. It's the need for healing is so great on so many levels now about so many things. I mean, how do you hold that? And what is there an area or a couple of areas that really touch your heart right now in terms of healing needs, people, planet, relationships? If you could just say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, I just really want to honor my teachers because I think they've been talking to us a lot about the Toltec calendar, the Mayan calendar, the cycles and shifts that we're in right now. So I want to say back since 2009, a lot of these teachers have been talking about, well, certainly in the Toltec calendar, because we are watching the cosmos in much bigger cycles, that there's these cycles or calendars that are for kind of bigger cosmic shifts. And those are 6,625 year cycles. And we're in the middle of the transition from the fifth sun to the sixth sun. And I think it helps me to know those things because they've been talking about it, and doing ceremony around this for a while. And that these represent big shifts in consciousness for humanity. It's like a rite of passage for us as the collective consciousness. And so I think of us as going from like teenagers to young adults right now in terms of collective consciousness. And that the time of the fifth sun was one marked by a lot of patriarchy, racism, all the isms, sexism, a lot of war and separation and us versus them. And the time that we're about to begin is the time of the sixth sun, coming into our Quetzalcoatl nature, our divine self, our human self that's integrating and co-creating with the planet, universe, with ancestors. And I love that Sergio Magaña, my teacher, he says, don't get fundamentalist about any of it. What we call coming into our Quetzalcoatl consciousness is the same as coming into your Buddha consciousness, your unity consciousness, your Christ consciousness. We just know it by different names. Like I think there's a lot less conflict between mystics than there is between theologians. And the mystics all have calendars that point to a similar story and time and energy. And so we can resist or participate in that transition, right? And I know that he has said that what marks these big transitional shifts is a lot of there's always a lot of death. Not everyone's choosing to make that transition. There's always a lot of natural disasters. There's always a lot of collapse of systems because those systems are created in the last consciousness, so they won't serve in the next one. And so it's a very chaotic time. So all that's been transpiring has not surprised me because they've been talking to us about this for more than a decade. And at the same time, that doesn't mean I don't hold grief about the suffering that ensues in that time, right? In the context of that, I have come to become good friends with two men that I adore and love very much, Bayo Akomolafe and Orland Bishop. I've had the joy of being in ceremony and online with them and in person, and have this understanding of this is a chaotic time and it's supposed to be a chaotic time. And some of the ways that we're trying to solve problems are actually keeping us in the old paradigm. And so Love the two of them dearly. And then my friend Victoria Santos, who I love very much, she knows them as well as Respa Menakem. And she said, I think you guys need to know each other. You're all doing really incredible work and you don't know each other. And she brought them together. And of course, that was just magic. And out of them coming together and getting to know each other and build relationship, they had this vision, this channeling for something called Three Black Men. And I'll put a link to that so folks can look at it later. And they had this vision of doing this work together as three men, of tracing the Middle Passage and going LA, then Brazil, then Ghana, to do these events where they have one day that's just for Black men, and then a day that's open to everyone, where they're sharing in those spaces, and that it's a lot about magic and medicine, coming together as community to be in deep inquiry about the crisis and the crossroads that we're in right now, and the importance of Black men and the magic of Blackness, not as a race, but as there's a piece that they hold around the transition time that we're in, that the darkness is really, really important and beautiful and magical. Yeah. And I think the idea of the three of them holding Black men on the first day and being in a place of ceremony and intimacy and love and caring and nurturing for another, and inviting all the sacred feminine in to hold that space around them. We weren't in there with them, but they asked all these medicine women to come in and bless the space and do ceremony in the space and to set the energy and to bring in roses. And then to greet them when they came back out, to receive them as a village, really, as a village. That Saturday was a magical day. And and then, and I'm still kind of integrating so much of the medicine that the men shared, but there's something about the three of them together. Bio talked about this a lot, like we're in this time of the binary. And the number 3 is really important because it's cutting across the binary, and and the things that are magic are in the cracks, the things that break the binary. And he also, one of my favorite things that Bio shared, because he talked about this black hole, and I'll put a link in before we leave, that several hundred years ago was spewing out this, it like sucked something in. And then it was spewing out this cosmic music. And he said around the same time that was happening, white supremacy was beginning to take its hold, that story, that narrative, the things that were happening on the planet. And he talked a lot about whiteness, not as a human being or a particular person or a race, but whiteness as a system. He said whiteness is a social arrangement. It has no content in itself. What it does is it extracts, it enlists, it arranges, and it flattens. It wants to flatten the world, to starve it of its music. It did this to all of us: white bodies, black bodies, brown bodies, spotted bodies, frog bodies, rhizomatic bodies, bacterial bodies. And it's the idea that there's nothing else, nothing more, that the world is silent except for the music that we create, we meaning white people, right? Or humans, that there's nothing else. They said, and while that was going on, this engorgement, desperation, and desolation, inside this black hole was spitting out a cosmic symphony and jazz. And so there's this interesting thing that he was just talking about, like, and Orlin was too, because he was talking about the theft of water from the native folks of LA and the pipes. And that the pipes that were created to corral the water, control the water, that in the very creation of anything like that, you're creating the conditions in which that's going to burst through in the future. And so there's so much about the time of being in song and ceremony together and seeing these three incredibly wise and good men in loving relationship with each other, in ceremony together, and sharing their understanding of this time that we're in was so transformative for everyone there. And to put down our need for being in the old story that isn't serving any life. The thing I love about Bio is he doesn't just talk about healing the divides. You know, there's a lot in my tradition around this is the time of bringing the medicine hoop back together of the different colors of humanity. And it's also about restoring our relationship with the trees, with the oceans, with the elements. It's about restoring our relationship with ancestors. It's about restoring our relationship with the earth guardians who are in the non-human world that are part of all of our traditions. If we go far back, all of our ancestors were indigenous to place, had relationship and ceremony around ancestors, and transitioned to ancestor world. All of our ancestors knew how to do this at one point and lost it at different points along the road. And this is the time of coming back into that. And I know that these men opened up some kind of energetic portal this weekend to let more of that energy through. And I'm forever indebted to them.
Brenda, thank you so much for that answer to my question, which ended up being so much more than an answer to my question. So thank you. But I want to invite anyone else who does have a question for Brenda, perhaps, to put it in the chat, and we'll see if anything comes up.
I'd love to follow up on what you just were talking about, Brenda. The portal that has been opened. What do you envision the new consciousness being?
Well, I can share about what I've been told by my elders, because everything in our world is cyclical. And so the suns are alternate between being outward looking and inward looking. And so the fifth sun is very outward looking. And then the sixth sun is very inward looking. So we'll be marked by a lot more inner work, being more dedicated to our inner work. It will also be restoring a lot of the mystic and sacred feminine that has been repressed, restoring the wisdom of the different parts of the medicine wheel that have been thrown out. It's not valid or savage or evil or whatever you want to call it. I think that those who gave up their connection to the non-human world and these ways of being were afraid of the things they didn't understand anymore. And there's a lot of indigenous prophecy about the restoration. I know in the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, there's a lot of conversation around the fact that prior to colonization, what the indigenous folks in South America talked about was like you had to cultivate both of your wings, the wing of the eagle, the wing of the condor, in order to fly as a balanced human being. So that means your intellect, your doing in the world, your sacred masculine, whatever you call those things by, because I think we're going to be past the feminine and masculine binary these days. But that there was an energy of kind of intellect doing in the physical world. And then there's another wing that's more about the intuitive, the feminine, the connection with the earth, more connection with the heart and the relational. And that part is what has been repressed in so many traditions, because that's about people's direct relationship with source. And when religions partner with the empire, they got rid of that part, because you can't control people that have their own relationship with source, right? And so there's a part of spiritual path that's going to return a lot of this intuitive, contemplative to and restore that. And some of that has been happening. And we see as we've been approaching this time that mindfulness, yoga, has kind of spread all over the globe. he said the other thing that's going to begin to happen is that a lot of the dream practices of different traditions are going to come back in a real way, in the same way that we see yoga and mindfulness schools spreading, that we'll see dream schools coming back. Because in our tradition, we understand that things get created in the dream time in the spirit world first before they come here into the physical realm. And so he always says, if you're not working the dream time, you're not in charge of your life. You're not co-creating the spirit. So a lot of these practices said will come back, a lot of restoration of the sacred feminine in different forms, in different ways, and our relationship with the earth and nature, a lot of ceremonies for our ancestors, and shepherding and supporting ancestors when they're transitioning in ways that we've forgotten. I've been told that this is probably the time in history where we have the most beings kind of stuck in between worlds, because we've lost those ways of supporting energetically on the other side. Kahuna, come here. He's looking for his mama. So, and then the other thing he said is that people who don't start being in relationship with the earth, making offerings to the earth, being in ceremony with the earth, are really going to suffer in this time, because she's not going to tolerate people not coming back into right relationship. So he said those ceremonies with the earth are going to be really, really important. And then a lot of stuff around kind of building intentional communities again. And that's not just with the humans. Yes, it's intentional community around us as a human family, but it's about restoring our relationship with the non-human world and co-creating and being in right relationship with them, not dominion over them, but in relationship and co-creation with them. So that's another big part that they've talked about. And then really restoring the sacredness of Blackness. If you think about the cosmic void, around the womb, around the dark soil, that these are the places that the seeds of new life begin. And there's a mystical and magical and important piece that the darkness has to play. So I think about in all the different traditions, there's ways that we've kept kind of like, so we have Coatlicue as life and death. And we think about that as one being that carries both the birth of new things and the composting of old things, and that both are necessary and part of the life cycle, right? And that there's ways that humanity has tried to pretend like we're not part of nature and part of natural life cycles. But all traditions have that, right? Like, so we've kept the Kuan Yin and the Virgin Mary, but we've repressed Pele, Kale, Coatlicue as death. And so the restoration of the importance of the cycles of life and death and composting and the resistance, to aging and to death that we have in our culture is really an illusion. And a lot of that is connected to the demonization of Blackness and of women. So there's a lot of restoration of those things that have become desacralized, that have always been sacred, places and people that have always been sacred but have become desacralized, coming back into sacredness. It's very, very important. Yeah. And then the other piece I'll say is that for us to come into our Quetzalcoatl nature, it's very important to do our ancestral and karmic healing work, so that those things that have been passed down the line that are controlling our energies, our bodies, our illnesses, so many things, that we can't step into our divine nature as a child of the universe and the cosmos and the earth and the capacity to co-create with that if we don't heal the ancestral and karmic with each other, with the land. And this work has always been important, but we actually can't go into the time of the sixth sun if we don't do that first. And so there's also just a time of acknowledging, honoring, clearing of some of those things. We can't spiritually bypass that part of this.
I'm just like, if we were in person, I would just be saying yes to everything. And thank you, and offering gratitude. So many deep resonances with us at SGTI as well as personally. You've given us this beautiful explanation of like a zooming out. I'm wondering if we can zoom in Can I ask a really specific question about
Yeah.
ways that you incorporate the natural environment into your relationships and one-on-one sessions and in group sessions? What does it look like to bring in the natural environment?
Well, certainly a lot of the work that I do lately has been teaching people Toltec, ancient Toltec breath and energy practices around connecting with the sun's energy, the moon's energy, and the cycles of the sun and the moon too. Because a lot of this is about restoring our relationship in the cycles of nature that we've kind of tried to divorce ourselves from for different reasons. Doing ancestor work to clear, through breath and energy work. To do land healing work, ceremonies around healing the land and the karma that the land is taken in because of what we've done in different places. Ancestors have been asking me to clear a lot of heavy karma from my father's family in Nicaragua. It's been doing some of that work. So just helping people reconnect to their capacity to store energy so they're not depleting themselves while doing this work. So they can restore themselves. And also, particularly for healers and spiritual folk, like a lot of this work, he tells us half you store for yourself and the work you're doing on yourself and your line, and half you're saving for your work with others so that you're not healing people out of your own life force. So there's a lot around kind of energy and sovereignty. And that when we're in right relationship, like I can't store energy with the sun or the moon if I'm not first acknowledging my relationship and making offerings. We always make the offerings of the best energy of our dreams, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions through our breath. And then we make other offerings, and then we're allowed to store energy. So much of this is about learning to be a good relative again with each other and with the non-human world. So for me, a lot of that's as simple as doing some of these practices and learning to be in relationship again. And to remember that when we're in right relationship, the universe wants to support us on our path and purpose. And it wants us to give us energy to do that work. It wants to provide abundance to do that work. But it's hard for it to give to us when we're not in reciprocity and relationship. And so a lot of this is really just about holding space for people to reconnect, to make offerings, to ask in a good way, to be a good relative with the non-human world again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see a question from Joan.
Yes, please take that, Brenda. Do you want to read it aloud to us?
Sure. Brenda, or do you want to read it, Joan? I'd love to hear your voice.
Yeah, sure, I'll read it. My name is Joan. I'm very glad to meet you, Brenda, and to be here in this virtual space with you. I live on the ancestral lands of the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage in the state of Arkansas, northwest Arkansas. But my question has to do with another spiritual tradition, and it honors the earth and nature. I have a ritual circle, a Wiccan ritual circle, and we practice through the wheel of the year, and also honor the divine feminine and goddesses that have been of the past, but that we see are very much present. And so my question for you is if you've ever, explored or been in contact with Wiccans along your spiritual path. And there's quite a variety of Wiccans too, because of the way that developed. But what we do, we go back to what our ancestry of Celtic.
Yes.
And so are bringing that forward again and honoring our ancestors in that way. And so as you have been speaking, I've just been struck with a lot of the parallels.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I just want to say thank you for doing the work to reconnect to your lineage, to your ancestors, because it's so important. And, when I've taught curanderismo courses at CIIS, people of all different traditions come and I say, I'll teach you a little bit about this tradition, but your research papers have to be around researching what's the medicine of your ancestors, because otherwise we get very grabby, right? With other people's cultures. So the fact that you're really and that grabbiness comes from a hunger of something that you know is missing, right? So when folks are really doing the ancestral work and asking their ancestors who are the medicine people back there, somewhere back there, like, help me reconnect to my stuff, that makes me really happy. And I'm so I feel really lucky because Spirit has been telling me for a number of years that me and the women's circle I'm part of, so 10, 11 years ago, Spirit told me I had to start a women's circle that had to be women of all colors of the medicine wheel, and that we would be sharing medicine across our traditions with each other, and that someday we would be stewarding land together. And that land was supposed to be stewarded in a particular way where it has teachers of all colors of the medicine wheel who are connected to their ancestors, the land guardians, in these ancient ways, leading and doing ceremony together. And so in the last 10 to 15 years, Spirit has been preparing me through that with bringing me to different conferences where there's medicine people, shamanic people of different traditions. So I have friends who are in the Dagara lineage with Melodoma Sameh. I have friends who are Korean shaman women who do incredible ceremony with knives and with the earth. And I've been around, I frequently go, I've been invited the last couple of years to teach at Fairy Congress up in Oregon. And that's largely Druidic, Wiccan, European folk that are connected to that tradition. And then obviously I've been around a lot of indigenous Red Road folks, here and in Central America. So I have been around a lot of folks, a friend of the woman in my circle was part of some of the things with Starhawk here, pre-pandemic, and invited our whole moon circle to go to some of those events here. So I feel very fortunate that I've gotten to be in ceremony across all colors of the medicine wheel at different points in my life. And that, when we get the land that we get, I know that we're supposed to be in ceremony there and honoring the wisdom of the different lineages and bringing some restoration and visibility to those things that have been hidden or lost. And in addition to bringing through kind of old medicine bundles that need to be restored for the hoop of humanity, even those medicine bundles came through at one time when they were needed by the people. And there's new medicine bundles that need to come through right now. And when we're in ceremony across difference on the land in a good way, there will be new ceremonies that come through, because the truth is we're a lot less isolated than we were hundreds of years ago. We have children who carry all colors of the medicine wheel in them. So there's ceremonies that are meant to come through in this time, when we're back in right relationship with each other and the land and the ancestors. Those things will begin to come through.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Blessed be.
Maybe we have time for one more question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be greedy because I've already asked one question, but I'm burning on the inside. Brenda, I'm wondering, what are you reading, or what would you recommend that we read right now? What some resources for us?
So there's a sister who I really love and that we just had speak at my work. And she just put out a book called We Heal Together. Her name is Cassandra Johnson. Really loving her book a lot right now. We had her talk a little bit about ancestor healing. And I know that she's got another book that's coming out soon that's about affinity groups, and finding the sacred space to be a part and doing our work, and then also coming together, right? But the sacredness of being in like people of color affinity groups or other types of affinity groups. I know that both are necessary. So that's someone who I really love. And I will say anything by the three Black men. They all have books that I think are incredible. My teacher said he has books out, but I find he's better in person. as a teacher than he is as a writer. Online or in person, his transmissions are better verbal. I think that's true for a lot of Indigenous people. I think we're just better at the oral tradition than we are at the written tradition. Sherry Mitchell is another one I really love. She and I did a talk, I think, a while back at CIIS. That was really wonderful. But she has a book called Sacred Instructions. So I'll write that down. And I suspect there's a lot of collective wisdom in the circle too. I'm not the only one that's reading good books, so I'm curious what you're reading.
Anyone want to answer that? I can, because I posed the question, I can answer. I'm reading a lot of Howard Thurman right now.
Yeah. My dear friend Reverend Liza Rankow does a lot of kind of courses on Howard Thurman.
Yeah,
her core teacher too.
Yeah,
good stuff.
And I think there's a question there, Brenda, about when is your next book coming out?
It's so funny that you say that, because years ago I got called up to the mountains, there's a mountain near my, a hill near my house that has a lot of trees, and the tree said, you have to come up here for sunrise ceremony. And I was like, I don't know where you are. Oh yeah. I have all these things are bubbling. Anything by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's just popped. And then also, if you haven't seen it, Undrowned. I love this book. And that's by Pauline Gumbs. Yeah, I love doing practices from that with other folks when I'm on Zoom calls. And I'm sure I'm missing part of her name. It's Pauline Gumbs something. My brain's not working right now. So yeah, the when I went up there at sunrise and I asked the trees, why'd you come up here? And went, sang songs, made offerings to the land. And they said, you have to start a women's circle. You have to leave your job at Movement Strategy Center, which was really hard for me because I was really happy there at the time. They said, you came to be a spiritual teacher and healer in this time of shift, and you've been sneaking healing work into all of your jobs on the side, and now it needs to be your primary role as we approach this time. And so that was a big leap to leave that mess. That made me really happy. And then they said, years from now, you'll be stewarding land with the Women's Circle. And we're approaching that time now. The land's ready for us to steward. But it wanted a lot of healing before we got here, because it used to be a rock quarry. Needed a lot of healing first. But then they said, you'll also be writing a book later that has 3 kind of sections. One will be about the wisdom of the indigenous ways that has been lost or gone underground and why that happened. The second part is more about communities that are reclaiming that way of being, or have never lost it or are reclaiming in this time. And then a section that's more about the prophecies across different traditions and this transition from the 5th to 6th sun that's talked about in different cultures in different ways. And that we have this opportunity and gift that we have right now to be a participant in that. So yeah, that's the next book. And I have no idea when that's going to happen, because I need time to do that and go away and write. And so much of what ancestors are calling me to is to do healing ceremony with groups of people, with land, with retreat centers, to start a land trust that talks about stewardship from the place of relationship with the land guardians and not domination or dominion. There's lots of great places that are doing good work, but are still in this attitude of domination over the land and knowing what's best here, instead of being in relationship and asking what the land wants and what the guardians want and co-creating with the non-human realm. So they're very clear that the land trust I create has to be talking about everyone who's on the Stewards Council is listening and in ceremony with land. and doesn't do anything without the permission of that land and the other beings on that land. And that the land itself has a voting space at the table around decisions, in addition to people listening. And there's so many indigenous rights of nature kinds of things that'll be part of that, what that looks like. And that it'll be a place where we have intergenerational training around being in right relationship to land and each other again, that it's learning the ceremonies, teaching healers, bringing in young ones. The land really wants circles for young ones that are coming in with gifts so that they're mentored and supported by other people who carry medicine in the community. And so that they learn integrity with the medicine, sovereignty, energetic protection with the medicine. I think so many of us grew up with these ways of knowing and shut them down because it wasn't safe. And so help bring there's a lot of young ones bringing in blueprints for the new systems that are breaking down and the creation of the new ones. And they need to be supported to bring that vision through. Yeah. So the next book will be about that, I'm sure, about where spirituality is headed for, that takes us beyond silos and is about being a global and cosmic and earth citizen, and that honors all traditions and also transcends any one tradition. I know that's what the land has told me. It's like, I want mystic practices of all traditions honored here, and I want this place to transcend any one tradition. So something along those lines. We'll see.
Thanks for giving us a teaser. I feel honored to hear the trailer version. Yeah, it does. It sounds amazing. Brenda, this has been an integrative, open. You bring such clarity and wisdom to this conversation, and we are so, so grateful. Wondering, how would you like to, we don't want to say end, but like, what would be the final thing in this moment that you might want to bring to this group of spiritual companions?
Well, so many years ago when I was doing a lot of boys and men of color work, I had this really sweet memory of Jerry Teo, who's an elder, talking with these Black and brown men in the Central Valley. And first he was going to show them all the slides around the statistics of young Black and brown men. And he said, I'm not even going to show you that. You know these things, you live these things, your fathers, your brothers, your cousins live these things. And I remember him sitting at the edge of the stage, and he started speaking these words to them. And it stayed with me, and Spirit asked me to adapt them in some ways for when I'm working with folks. So I'm just going to ask us to do the same thing. So I'm going to ask you to put your hands on your heart. Take a deep breath in. Connect with your beautiful and sacred body that holds your beautiful spirit. And I'm going to ask you to repeat these words after me. I am loved.
I am loved.
I am a blessing.
I am a blessing.
I am sacred just the way I am.
I am sacred just the way I am.
I have dignity.
I have dignity.
I have wisdom and gifts for the world.
I have wisdom and gifts for the world.
I'm going to ask you all to unmute and to rub your hands together and say this to each other. You are loved.
You are loved.
You are loved.
You are a blessing.
You are a blessing.
You are sacred just the way you are.
You are sacred just the way you are.
You have dignity.
You have dignity.
You have wisdom and gifts for the world.
You have wisdom and gifts for the world.
Thank you for this precious time together.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your medicine in the world.
Thank you.
My only sadness is that I want to hear about you and your stories. But you can always reach out and we can share stories.
Sure.
Yeah. I would love to connect.
Yeah. Okay.
Beautiful. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next
Have a
time.
good day. And I thank your ancestors for making it possible and bringing us together today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mwah.